At the board meeting, my daughter stared me down across the polished glass table and said words I never thought I would hear in my life. Step down for my husband, or walk out. The room went silent. Every executive's eyes flicked between us, some wide with shock, others calculating what this could mean for their own positions. I smiled, closed my folder, and walked out. The sound of my heels echoing across the marble floor felt louder than any applause could have. But what happened next? The missed calls, the voicemails, the quiet storm brewing behind closed doors would change everything. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. I know what you're thinking. How could a daughter betray her mother like that? How could someone so young, someone I raised, trained, and guided, believe she could wield power against me so openly? And yet, there she was. Vanessa Monroe, 28 years old, in her sharp designer suit, standing like she owned the room, with Jason, her husband, 30, sitting smugly in my chair. That chair had held my victories, my defeats, my countless hours of work. And now it had him. Let me take you back a little, so you understand just how far we've come and how close we were to tearing each other apart. My name is Elizabeth Monroe, I'm 52, and I've spent over 25 years building Monroe Technologies from a tiny startup into one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country. People say I have a mind for strategy, a talent for turning risks into profits, and a stubborn streak that can only be rivaled by my own daughter, although I didn't know that until now. Vanessa was always ambitious. Ever since she was a teenager, she had an intensity about her that both terrified and impressed me. But ambition can be a double-edged sword. For years, I assumed I was molding her into a capable leader, preparing her to one day take the reins of the company. We laughed about strategy over brunch, debated business moves in the kitchen, even played mock boardroom scenarios for fun. But ambition has its own mind, and loyalty has its own price. I never suspected that one day, she would see me as the obstacle to her husband's rise rather than as her mentor. Jason. That's another story. He's charming, confident, maybe even a little cocky, and he's only 30. In the beginning, I liked him. He seemed driven, full of ideas, and eager to make his mark. But I learned quickly that ambition without patience can be dangerous. Jason saw the boardroom as a battlefield and my chair as a throne that was his by right of marriage. And Vanessa, blinded by her devotion to him or maybe her own desire for control, chose to support him over me. I remember walking into that boardroom that morning. My folder was thick with quarterly reports, financial statements, and projections that I had spent nights perfecting. I was ready to present, to inspire confidence, to show the board why our strategies would take the company to the next level. I didn't expect a confrontation. Not like this. And certainly not from my own daughter. The tension was immediate. The air was thick, almost suffocating. I noticed the board members shifting in their seats, some trying to mask their surprise, others openly curious to see how I would react. I could feel their minds working, calculating, guessing. Would I fight? Would I break? And I could see it, the tiniest flicker of doubt in Vanessa's eyes, a flash of insecurity that she was desperately trying to hide. But she hid it poorly. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then I smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a sheepish smile, a slow, deliberate smile that said more than words ever could. I closed my folder, stood up, and walked out. That sound of my heels was deliberate, almost ceremonial. And as I left, I caught Vanessa's expression. Pride, fear, and maybe a hint of regret all tangled together on her face. But the story doesn't end there. 10 days later, I woke up to 22 missed calls. 22 calls that changed the trajectory of not just my career, but my entire family dynamic. Some of them were from the board, some from friends, and some from people I didn't even expect. Each voicemail revealed cracks, betrayals, and secrets that had been hidden in plain sight. It was like a storm had been quietly gathering, and I had just stepped right into the eye of it. So, I have to ask you, what would you do in my place? Walk away from everything you built, or fight back? Could you forgive a betrayal like this, or would you let it consume you? And the most important question, When your own family becomes the opponent, where do you find the strength to stand? This isn't just a story about a boardroom confrontation. It's about power, loyalty, ambition, and the quiet, deadly ways that love and envy can collide. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll take you through every shocking twist, every moment of tension, and every revelation that came after that fateful meeting. You'll see the boardroom drama, the family confrontations, and the subtle moves that led to a payoff no one saw coming. And just when you think you have it figured out, when you think you know how the story ends, something unexpected will happen. Because in a world where ambition meets family loyalty, nothing is ever simple. And nothing is ever over. The storm was just beginning. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. I never thought I would see the day my own daughter would openly challenge me in front of the entire board. And yet, there she was, Vanessa Monroe, 28, standing tall in her designer suit, eyes sharp, lips pressed into that determined line she often wore when she wanted something badly. Across from her, Jason, her husband, sat in my chair. My chair. The one I'd fought to keep polished and commanding for decades. And just like that, the empire I'd built for 25 years suddenly seemed fragile. The boardroom was silent, the kind of silence that weighs on your chest. You know the kind. Everyone's watching, waiting to see what happens next, every mind racing with speculation. My fingers rested on the polished oak table, the folder I had brought for my quarterly presentation untouched. I looked at Vanessa and asked, quietly but firmly, "Is this really how you want to do this?" Her voice didn't waver. "Step down for my husband or walk out." The words were deliberate, calculated. She had practiced this, I realized, maybe even rehearsed it in front of a mirror. The board shifted uncomfortably. Some executives looked shocked. Others smirked behind the table, seeing this as an opportunity to play the power game in ways I had always warned them about. I inhaled slowly. I could feel the electricity in the room. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, every whisper magnified. And for a moment, I let the question hang there. How could she betray me like this? How could she see everything I had built and think she could just replace me with her husband? And yet, beneath her boldness, I saw the tiniest crack, a flicker of doubt, a hesitation she tried to hide behind her perfectly measured composure. I smiled. Not the forced smile of someone trying to keep the peace, not the polite smile that eases tension. No, this was a smile that carried the weight of experience, a calm so deliberate it unsettled everyone in the room. I closed my folder, stood up, and walked out. Each step was measured, deliberate, almost ceremonial. My heels echoed against the floor, each tap a declaration that I wasn't defeated. The board was frozen. Eyes wide. Mouth slightly open. Jason looked smug, but even he couldn't hide a flicker of uncertainty. Vanessa's expression shifted rapidly, pride, fear, and confusion all tangled together on her face. She had expected compliance, perhaps even gratitude. Instead, she got silence and the knowledge that I was untouchable on my own terms. Leaving the room, I didn't feel anger. Not immediately. I felt clarity. I realized something crucial. Stepping out wasn't surrender. It was strategy. In a battle, sometimes walking away is the first move toward winning. And I had always believed in strategy. Always. But this was different. This was personal. This wasn't about quarterly reports or profit margins. This was about family, loyalty, and the power dynamics that no business school can teach. I thought back to the dinners, the late-night talks, the endless guidance I had poured into Vanessa. And now she was using all that knowledge against me, thinking she could outmaneuver me with youth and audacity. I remembered Jason too, his overconfidence, his eagerness to please Vanessa, his assumption that marriage somehow gave him entitlement. He had underestimated me. Badly. And while Vanessa thought she had the upper hand, I had already started thinking 10 moves ahead. The hallway felt empty after the boardroom. I could hear faint murmurs from the meeting room behind me, whispers that probably included phrases like, "Is she really leaving?" or "Can she come back?" I didn't rush. I walked slowly, letting every step reinforce the calm that masked the storm building inside. Because in the silence, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about the board meeting. This was about a chessboard with living pieces, each of us maneuvering for position, and I had just revealed my first move. As I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed. Notifications started piling up, subtle at first. Then came the first missed call. Then another. My pulse quickened. I didn't check them immediately. Instead, I allowed the moment to settle, the betrayal, the shock, the calculated audacity of my daughter, and let it fuel my determination. Because make no mistake, this confrontation was only the beginning. Vanessa thought she was testing me, seeing if I would fold under pressure. She didn't know that walking out, smiling, closing my folder, that simple act had already flipped the board in my favor. She didn't yet see that power isn't always about taking a chair. Sometimes, it's about letting the world think you're gone while you prepare your next move. And the board? They were watching, too. Some were stunned. Some were intrigued. Some, quietly loyal to me, were relieved. But all of them knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same. As I rode the elevator down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the days ahead would be chaotic. That 10 days from now, or maybe 10 hours, or even 10 minutes, the fallout from this moment would arrive like a storm. And when it did, there would be no turning back. I stepped out into the lobby, drew a deep breath, and let the tension of the morning release in one controlled exhale. But I knew the truth: the real game had only just begun. And what came next would challenge every assumption, every alliance, and every ounce of trust one had placed in my own family. And days. That's how long it took for the first ripple of consequences to hit me after I walked out of the boardroom that morning. 22 missed calls. At first, I ignored them, letting the silence stretch like a warning. Then curiosity got the better of me. The first call wasn't from Vanessa or Jason or even a board member. It was from someone I didn't expect. The messages started innocuously enough. Voicemails from colleagues, whispers of concern, subtle probing questions. "Elizabeth, are you okay? Do you need us to step in?" But as I listened, the tone shifted. Anxiety, fear, and panic seeped into their words. And then came the pieces of the puzzle that I hadn't seen before. Mistakes Jason had made in the past week, errors in judgment that Vanessa either overlooked or deliberately ignored, and worst of all, the subtle but deliberate attempts by my own daughter to rewrite the narrative of my leadership in front of the board. It was fascinating in a way. Betrayal often is. There's a kind of clarity in seeing people reveal their true colors under pressure. And for all Vanessa's ambition, she had underestimated one fundamental truth: experience beats audacity every single time. Jason's inexperience, combined with Vanessa's overconfidence, made them both dangerously predictable. I remembered the board's reactions the day of the ultimatum. Some were shocked, unsure if this was an act of audacity or desperation. Others were quietly calculating their next moves. And now, with the aftermath unfolding, the room was splitting quietly into factions. Some still loyal to me, some eager to see a shift in leadership, and others, like wolves circling in the grass, waiting for an opportunity to pounce on weakness. Meanwhile, Vanessa's personal fallout was already in motion. She tried to act confident on calls with board members, assuring them that her husband's vision was innovative and necessary. But cracks started to show. Small missteps in emails, half-formed strategies, and moments of hesitation during team meetings betrayed her insecurity. People notice these things. Especially the people who've been in the room long enough to know the difference between true confidence and posturing. At home, I felt the tension in another way. The family dinners that once felt warm and lively now carried undercurrents of calculation. Vanessa was polite, but there was distance, a kind of wariness that I hadn't felt before. Jason, for all his charm, was visibly stressed. I never expected the 22 missed calls to lead me to the moment that changed everything. By now, the company was buzzing with whispers, subtle power plays, and quiet panic. Jason, sitting in my chair, had started to make mistakes, small at first, almost invisible, but damaging enough to shake confidence in his leadership. Vanessa, for all her boldness, was beginning to see cracks she hadn't anticipated. And I watched it all unfold, quietly, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The first call I answered was from an executive I hadn't spoken to in months. Her voice was tense but controlled. "Elizabeth, you need to hear what's happening in the finance department. Jason, he's made a huge misstep." And just like that, the dominoes began to fall. Reports that had been approved without scrutiny were riddled with errors. Contracts were signed without review. Strategic decisions were made without consultation. Every blunder compounded, and the more I learned, the more I realized how dangerously unprepared Jason truly was. But it wasn't just the business missteps that fascinated me. It was Vanessa's reaction. I could see her trying to maintain control, making calls, sending emails, reassuring the board. And yet, her confidence was cracking. Every time a mistake surfaced, her voice faltered, her messages betrayed uncertainty, and her carefully constructed image began to unravel. She had underestimated one critical factor. I wasn't just her mother. I was a strategist who had spent decades in the trenches. And I had already anticipated nearly every move she and Jason might make. It was during this time that the subtle genius of patience became clear. I didn't rush into confrontation. I didn't storm back into the boardroom or call an emergency meeting. Instead, I quietly rebuilt my position. Small gestures, private conversations, and discreetly shared insights reminded the board why I was the leader who had built the company. And slowly, loyalty began to shift. People who had been dazzled by Jason's boldness now noticed his inexperience, and my steady, calm authority became the anchor the company needed. Then came the real twist. One of the voicemails. The one I had almost overlooked was from a senior consultant who had been brought in by Vanessa. She had been trying to secure insider information, push projects through without my approval, and assert Jason's authority in ways that violated protocol. In her voicemail, she inadvertently revealed everything: miscommunications, hidden mistakes, and even a plan that Vanessa and Jason had hoped would secure their dominance in the company. It was the moment that tied together all the warnings, the mistakes, and the missed calls. With this knowledge, I began to maneuver quietly but deliberately. Every decision I made from that point forward was calculated to expose vulnerabilities while preserving the appearance of calm detachment. I watched as Jason struggled to manage crises he didn't fully understand, and Vanessa tried to patch holes she couldn't see. The irony was delicious. The very skills I had taught Vanessa were now turning against her. Negotiation, strategy, patience, all applied incorrectly, became their undoing. And then came the confrontation I had been waiting for. I requested a private meeting with Vanessa, away from the boardroom, away from prying eyes. Her face was a mixture of anxiety and pride when she entered, expecting perhaps a lecture or even a threat. Instead, I looked at her calmly and said, "You've done well, but you've missed one key lesson. Timing matters." Her confusion was palpable, and I could see her beginning to understand that boldness alone isn't enough. We spoke quietly, but every word carried weight. I reminded her of lessons learned, strategies taught, and mistakes made. I didn't scold. I didn't humiliate. I simply highlighted the patterns she had ignored and the consequences of miscalculating both human behavior and corporate dynamics. Vanessa left that meeting visibly shaken, realizing that her attempt to force a power shift had failed spectacularly, despite her audacity. Meanwhile, the boardroom dynamic shifted subtly but irreversibly. Jason's confidence, once so towering, diminished with every mistake revealed. Vanessa's overconfidence crumbled as her missteps became apparent. And I quietly reclaimed my authority without theatrics, leaving everyone to realize that power isn't always taken. Sometimes, it's demonstrated through patience, foresight, and composure. By the end of those days, the situation had completely reversed. I had regained control of the company, and yet the most striking victory wasn't corporate. It was personal. Vanessa and Jason had both learned the hard way that ambition without wisdom is dangerous, and that underestimating someone who has lived, struggled, and built from the ground up can have consequences far greater than anticipated. And here's the final twist: the 22 missed calls, the boardroom tension, the missteps, they weren't just obstacles. They were tools. Tools that, once used correctly, allowed me to reclaim both my position and my perspective. I didn't humiliate anyone publicly. I didn't fire anyone impulsively. Instead, I let the mistakes reveal themselves, and in doing so, I demonstrated a power far subtler, far more enduring than any loud confrontation could achieve. By the time the dust settled, I realized something profound. Power isn't always about being the loudest in the room, the most aggressive, or the most ambitious. Sometimes it's about watching, waiting, and knowing exactly when to act. And sometimes, walking out smiling, closing your folder, and letting others think they're in control is the move that wins everything. But even as the company returned to stability and the board acknowledged my quiet authority, I knew this wasn't the end. Family dynamics like ours are never truly resolved. Vanessa still carries ambition, Jason still craves influence, and I will always have to navigate the delicate balance between mentorship, leadership, and authority. The game is never over. And what comes next? Well, that's a story for another day. The dust had settled in the company, at least on the surface. Jason was quietly sidelined, Vanessa had been humbled, and the board, once tense and divided, had begun to recognize the quiet strength that comes with experience. But sitting in my office, overlooking the city skyline, I realized that the most important battles weren't fought in boardrooms or through quarterly reports. They were fought in families, in trust, and in the delicate, sometimes brutal, intersection between ambition and loyalty. I thought back to that moment. The moment Vanessa had confronted me with her ultimatum. The words still echoed in my mind: step down for my husband, or walk out. At the time, I had felt shock, a jolt of betrayal, and a surge of controlled fury. But beneath it all, there had been clarity. I knew that the way forward wasn't to fight her directly, nor to prove her wrong with anger. It was to act deliberately, strategically, and with patience. Walking out of that boardroom wasn't defeat. It was the first move in a game far bigger than either of us had realized. In the days that followed, watching the consequences unfold was both fascinating and deeply instructive. Jason's confidence had crumbled, not because anyone publicly challenged him, but because the weight of inexperience and overreach had become impossible to ignore. Vanessa, too, had learned the hard way that knowledge alone isn't power. Wisdom, timing, and judgment matter just as much. And I had reclaimed my position, yes, but more importantly, I had demonstrated that leadership isn't always about force. Sometimes, it's about subtlety. Yet, even as I regained control, the personal toll was undeniable. Watching my daughter stumble, even subtly, was bittersweet. I had spent years mentoring her, shaping her understanding of leadership, strategy, and negotiation. And here she was, using those very lessons in ways that initially felt like betrayal. But that, I realized, was also part of growth. Ambition, after all, can't be taught perfectly. Sometimes it has to be tested, sometimes by failure, sometimes by confrontation, and sometimes by the very people who love you most. There's a peculiar irony in family and business dynamics. The people closest to us have the ability to hurt us the most, intentionally or not. Vanessa had believed she could manipulate circumstances in her favor, that love or loyalty would compel me to step aside. She misjudged me. But I also understood her perspective. Ambition, desire, and the belief that one's path should be unobstructed can blind even the most talented, the most clever. And in that blindness, lessons are learned, painfully but permanently. I remember walking out that day, smiling and feeling a sense of calm that surprised even me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't defeated. I was observing, calculating, and preparing. And as the storm unfolded, each missed call, each mistake by Jason, each falter by Vanessa, reinforced the truth I had always known: power isn't claimed in a moment of rage or in loud confrontation. It's maintained through foresight, patience, and the ability to remain composed when chaos surrounds you. By the time the board had recognized my authority once again, I realized something even deeper. The victory wasn't just professional, it was personal. I had taught my daughter, albeit indirectly, that boldness without strategy can backfire. I had shown Jason that charm and ambition are no match for experience and discernment. And I had reminded everyone, the board, the executives, the silent observers, that true leadership isn't a title or a chair. It's the quiet command of respect, earned through actions, foresight, and integrity. Yet, even as I reflected, I knew the story wasn't over. Family is never simple. Vanessa still carries her ambition, and Jason still craves influence. Our interactions are tempered now with caution, awareness, and the subtle acknowledgement that power and family are a delicate balance. Every conversation, every decision, every board meeting carries the potential for new tension, new tests, and new revelations. The past 10 days had proven that one bold move could disrupt everything, but they had also shown that strategy, patience, and subtlety could restore balance. And even teach lessons that endure far beyond a single confrontation. As I looked out over the city, I allowed myself a small smile. The board knew who was in charge. Vanessa had learned, and Jason had realized limits he hadn't considered. But most importantly, I had reaffirmed my own understanding of what leadership truly requires: calm, patience, and the ability to act decisively when the moment arrives. Walking out that day, closing my folder, and smiling was more than a gesture. It was a statement, a declaration of authority, and a demonstration that sometimes the ultimate power move is to wait, observe, and act at the perfect moment. And as for the future, I know one thing for certain: this isn't over. Families like mine don't simply resolve conflicts and move on. Ambition, love, rivalry, and loyalty will continue to intertwine, creating new challenges, new opportunities, and new lessons. But one thing is guaranteed: I will always be ready. I will always act with foresight. And I will always remember that sometimes, stepping back is the ultimate step forward. The storm had passed, but the winds of ambition were never truly still. And in families like mine, in boardrooms like ours, the game is never truly finished. What comes next? Well, that's for the next chapter.